Everyone knows the art scene has always been able to cope with reality shortage, but how?
Where can we find more information on our culture than on TV?
I'm not gonna be a media whore. Newspapers!
The whole thing was accidental. I mean, we never decided anything along the way. It was just everything happened by accident. General Idea was a big accident. And we did a piece which we initially called General Idea, and everybody thought we meant the group was called General Idea, and everybody started calling us General Idea.
We were in Germany. It was like a rock and roll band had just arrived. Like there was thousands of people at the opening.
The reception in Europe for General Idea was different. In Europe, they were fun and exciting and clever and naughty, and it was just plain great.
General Idea have always been known as the artists, mail art, ephemera, performance art, video art.
They were such a big influence for many artists working in the issues of identity in New York, Berlin, Italy, San Francisco, Halifax, Vancouver.
It kind of worked a bit like a factory, where it was General Idea, but it included a number of people.
Well, I think in the beginning there was a lot of people around, and the borders of who General Idea was probably pretty gray. But as time went on, it became clear who the core members of General Idea were, and it was Felix A. and Jorge.
They really were three heads are better than one. Each of them was a different personality as an individual, but it was hard to tell who did what on any project. They had great ideas.
I think the biggest vehicle of General Idea's success internationally was initially was File magazine. Artists from all over the world contributed to File magazine, including Andy Warhol, Mike Kelly.
Their self-presentation as a collective changed many times over the years. One of the early ways in which they presented themselves was as businessmen, as a corporation, almost like General Motors. This is General Idea. That's very much part of the whole tradition of conceptual art.
I can now tell you that we are looking for financing in the private sector.
Later on, they presented themselves as architects, as master builders, engaged in the transition from concept, idea, to monument. They infantilized themselves. That also played with a whole kind of ménage à trois idea, that kind of questions, well, are they all sleeping with each other?
They took how ubiquitous the love image was and replaced it with AIDS. They used it everywhere, on billboards, as wallpaper, as pins, as rings, as everything.
And then the pills pieces. There's a darkness and a kind of a loneliness in that work, the pills and the large capsules that, that they're big enough to hold the body.
My name is Jorge Zonto, and with me I have A.A. Bronson and Felix Parts. We call ourselves General Idea.
By inventing the personas that we invented, we didn't have to worry about who we were or what our core nature was or any of those things that you're supposed to think about. And we could be anybody we wanted to be. We wanted to be famous, right? Well, what better way to measure fame than in column inches?
How about by the length of your part?
What?
Well, time on camera.
Anyway, all people ever do say about us is, oh, those crazy Canadians. Yeah. Let's tell our audience about the new logo that we designed for File.
What do you mean, we designed?
We? It wasn't we, it was Time Life.
Well, I'm sure it's all on File. As I was saying, File expands our frame of reference into the realm of the general public, but it seems we expanded a bit too far.
Mm-hmm. And in June 1974, Time Life sued File for simulation of life.
As I said, they didn't like our lifelike format.
They demanded we destroy all back issues, all original artwork, and we stop using our logo and that we pay them damages.
And you know what we did? We compromised.
What do you think would happen if Time Life bought out File?
Well, that wouldn't be buying out, that would be selling out.
No. You haven't sold out until you're out of stock. And we have got a lot of really effective ideas on the shelf.
In 1979, we were invited to Amsterdam, to Apple, to make a video for television. The Stedelijk Museum provided a studio. We lived there for 3 months. We had a professional television studio with a professional crew.
Here we are sitting at the Color Bar Lounge. We like to think of the Color Bar as a sort of cultural laboratory where we can experiment with new cultural mixes.
I mean, starting in about 75, 76, we started styling all the video based on formats from television rather than the stylings of art video.
As we publish File magazine, we are aware of its function as a cultural incubator. So too in this television show, we try to inject into the popular mainstream of culture these germs of art discourse. And this is the line of effectiveness, and this is the line of social responsibility, and the distance between them is trendiness, and they all meet here in the mount of artistic endeavor.
Sitcoms, born-again TV, game shows, the news, they're all geared toward the consumption of repressive role models. The only thing that sort of social control needs is a captive audience, and it's got 'em.
Come on, Felix. That conspiracy rant is so popular, it should be on television.
Every television show has to have commercials, so we made commercials for our own cocktails.
Drink it up, Billy. Enjoy it. Everywhere, boys like Billy are being initiated into the intoxicating flavor of Nazi milk.
We don't want to destroy television. We want to add to it. We want to stretch it.
With revolutionary cocktails.
We were very interested in cocktails because they were essentially postmodern, mixing opposing or conflicting ingredients and ending up with a new product.
Television creates new needs and then sells whole lines of new products to satisfy them.
Television isn't just a neutral media. If we can act like television, think like television, be like television, we can revolutionize the artist himself.
Tired of those same old contents? With these magnetic cups, you can spill the contents without breaking the context and fill them up again.
Test tube was a huge success, but not with Dutch television. They refused to show it on the basis that it looked too much like television and not enough like art. We went to Europe for 3 months, and when we came back, we discovered that about half the art scene had decided they hated us. We had a completely different reception in Europe, and that people saw us as being involved with a critique of media and culture. I think also in the traditions of Dada and Surrealism, there's a big use of irony and humor, whereas in Canada we were seen as sort of jokesters, that we were involved in a kind of parody even of art.
Since 1968, we've held 4 Miss General Idea pageants, which resulted in 4 winners. The first pageant was held in 1968, and this is Mimi Page, Miss General Idea 1968.
But I think the show's about to start.
I think I can hear AAMC now, Gigi.
Da-da-da-da-da-da.
Dame, el nombre de tu pageant, mira que así le vuelve spirit.
We decided to produce the 1984 Miss General Idea pageant as our ultimate pageant, and that anything we did between 71 and 84 would simply be rehearsals or some sort of part of the structure of planning for 84. And that way it sort of took the pressure off. We could do whatever we wanted when we wanted.
Thank you, AA. After all this time, I've really come to realize Dada, 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 capturing glamour, Dada, Dada, Dada. May I have the envelope, please? This is the award-winning pose of Miss General Idea 1971 to 83. Marcel idea.
The jurors announced that Marcel had captured glamour without falling into it. A beauty pageant really only consists of key moments. There was no real beauty pageant. All of our performances were rehearsals for 1984. Basically, the excuses to shoot video footage, which could then be rolled back into the videotapes.
We have Jorge Zontal with us now.
The 1984 Miss General Idea pageant is basically this. A framing device we have framed for our own devices to contain our framers.
You were looking quite vacant. I'm working on it.
Oh,
Dinah.
Hello out there. I'm Dinette, and I'm going through the motions in a tri-tier VB gown. Sans Helmut.
You're not an African queen, hey, or an alley queen. Not a Boy Scout queen, or a brownie queen. You're not a cleavage queen, or a closet queen. You're a beauty, immaculately clean, just a Bert Park's wet dream. Hey, you're not an ammo queen, not a garage queen. Oh, you're just a beauty queen.
Now, first of all, Felix, what's behind it all?
Well, Whitney, actually, there's nothing behind it at all. It's all on the surface. It's been a labor of pure fabrication. The threads of content cut by the forms of the data sawing blades are woven together to form a net that catches the content and rivets the attention on the surface.
We are designing, constructing, and erecting the 1984 Miss General Idea Pavilion.
You're not trying to duress, I don't need to regress this feeling.
The burning of the pavilion supposedly happens at the moment where we say, "May I have the envelope, please?"
Oh, I see your face.
Mimi, hey!
May we have the envelope, please?
Fire! Fire!
Nothing left but a charred ziggurat seared into the face of the earth and some hastily rescued artifacts.
There was a moment around 1980 in the international art world where the conceptual was suddenly of no interest anymore and the new painting was in. All the dealers were rushing to grab these new painters who mostly seemed to be from either southern Italy or Berlin. And they all, strangely enough, all painted animals, mostly like coyotes and wolves and things like this. And PS1 had an exhibition called The Beast, curated by Richard Flood. In some moment of inspiration, he invited General Idea to be part of this show. So we produced our first Poodle painting for that show because we thought it was the animal most opposite to what these wild painters were doing. And it was the most cultivated, the most cultured, the most intelligent, and in a way the most gay, but we didn't say that. We did many self-portraits over the years. We started together in '69, and we worked together until 1994. This is perhaps my favorite self-portrait of General Idea that we did. 3 babies in bed. P is for Poodle. The thing about the baby portrait and this portrait is that it's at a time when we had been doing work that had to do with queer identity, and there was a lot of ambiguity, and nobody had chosen to write about that. By 1983, still nobody had written about us from the point of view of sexuality. It was only in '86 that somebody finally did, and at that point, of course, the subject of queer theory was in a few universities, and a language had developed mostly around gay literature, I think, which could then be applied to art. So since we were pushing the envelope and since still nobody had written about us from the point of view of sexuality, we created a series of 10 paintings called Mando Kane Kama Sutra. And they're actually painted exactly the way that Frank Stella paintings are painted. They're on unprimed canvas and with a little bit of unpainted canvas separating all the colors. And we talked about them as being about how we work together. Still nobody wrote about it. We pushed it a little bit further. Fucking babies. Who could not write about that? Never appeared in the media. From the period starting about 76, 77, we started traveling in Europe and we were doing a lot of exhibitions in Europe. And we were really caught up with the heraldry that we saw everywhere and began to get into the language of the heraldry. And we realized it was the earliest form of visual communication. You know, as far as semiology goes, the roots are sort of there. And so we began to play with the form of heraldry and the rules of heraldry, only introducing all our own imagery. And this resulted ultimately in this series of 10 large paintings. The beginnings of the HIV theme, I think, were first seen there in this painting. And this is called the houndstooth virus. A little premonition. Three men working together in a group was perceived in Europe as being quite radical, whereas in Canada, that aspect, for example, was overlooked. We were seen as Marxist, which they never would have said about us in Canada. Because we work by consensus, anything we could come to consensus on, we could produce. Anything we didn't come to consensus on, we put aside. In a sense, we were always involved in group therapy. I mean, it was sort of 24/7 group therapy, you know.
Art's central myth is the myth of the individual genius. Each year, new art stars are found to satisfy the appetite, the psychological and economical needs of consumerism in the art community. And each year, the art stars of the past are ratified and mummified in retrospectives and monographs at museums and art magazines.
When we started in Toronto, we really felt sort of isolated. The art scene was extremely small. The only art publishing really was Arts Canada, which we found incredibly boring. The galleries that existed were limited. And we realized we had to sort of create our own parallel structure, our own art world. I studied architecture at the University of Manitoba. I was one of 8 people who dropped out to found a free school, a digger commune, an underground newspaper. I think I came to Toronto in '67, actually. Summer of Love was '67. Felix studied art at the University of Manitoba, and he was the bright guy who was not looked upon by the school itself as being the great talent that he was. His fellow students knew differently. Jorge was born in a concentration camp in Italy during the war of Yugoslavian Jewish parents. He came to Canada to study architecture at Dalhousie. He'd also been studying film and theater. We all met in Toronto in, I guess, late '68 and through the small theater scene, not through the art world at all. We did these sort of happenings at Theatre Passe Muraille. I think in part it was a kind of wish for an anonymity and to escape the sort of shackles of the artist as hero and the artist as genius and all of that, and be able to just be artists again. In the hippy-dippy days, Gerrard Street West was sort of the Carnaby Street of Toronto before Yorkville. So we found ourselves with nothing to do, unemployed, no money. And this little house had a store window put in it, and we rented it as a house. But we had essentially a shop, and we began to make fake stores as a way to entertain ourselves. Living in a storefront, raiding the garbage of businesses every night, put us in touch with a way of thinking about consumerism, so that our minds were really wrapped around the idea of consumerism right from the very beginning. We didn't know we were working together, or that we were forging a kind of approach to making art together, or an approach to working with each other. But that's what we were doing. This is another store window, something called Betty's. We purchased the entire contents of a women's dress store that had closed in 1948. For $150, we bought the entire thing, clothing, mannequins, etc., and we opened it again in our little living room. We got the front page of the Globe and Mail women's section, it was as it was then called. They didn't know it was an art project.
I think that was one of the reasons that Jorge and Felix and I got together, because we had no sense of any exterior older generation that we could relate to in the art world, or in any other world for that matter. By banding together, we could form some sense of community that could allow us all to grow more freely and more quickly than we could within the art world itself, as it was at that time.
We were very interested in the idea of art as life and life as art. We started File in '72. It came directly out of mail art. All these artists all over the world, especially in Canada, all mailing each other bits and pieces. It became a sort of cult object, I think, and in a way presenting a kind of slightly fictionalized view of the Canadian art world to the rest of the world. Our first museum show was in '79 at the Stedelijk Museum in Amsterdam, and we knew we had to have our own museum shop. And we wanted to be prepared for what we were sure would be a grand success on the museum circuit.
They used it culturally in their way, making products to sell again. But it's also a kind of a global merchandising, which now happens. They made out of their things, they made a boutique, a yen boutique. At the time when Japan had a huge success, at the time where the most expensive painting in the world was bought by a Japanese.
The idea was to make art that people could afford, and to create a sort of art that could spread out into the world, to create a different sort of economy than the art world normally has.
From the beginning, they understood the art system. Their work was so often about the art system, was so witty in the way that it appropriated the very structures of the art system. They were selling their own wares. They were, kind of taking over their own market.
We were always interested in thinking of ourselves as part of the globe, and the mass media as a way of networking around the globe. We were in a way complicit with the mass media while criticizing it, in a way parodying it. We were also doing it. Most of our videotapes were made for television.
Newspaper! Shut the fuck up! I'm not gonna crawl on all four and paint with my feet. I don't want to be a figure on their landscape. I'd like to paint them into a corner. Yeah, tell me about it. Nothing new, same old thing, irrelevant art. Come on, kick me. I don't want to play bad guy to their good guy, boho to their fucking bourgeoisie. I'm not gonna shit on a canvas so they can call it art and frame it. Stop. Bend over backwards for them and they fuck me up the ass. Whoops. I guess I'm really gonna get it. I'm scared. I'm really scared. Stop the fucking presses. Change the fucking channel. Shut the fuck up. Shut the fuck up.
Well, Felix, give me Poodles, banal, and effete.
Their relished role as watchdog, retriever, and gay companion.
Their delicious desire to be groomed and preened for public appearances.
In a word, their instinct to please.
Well said, Felix. Those that live to please must please to live.
And what pleases the media? An artist in artist drag.
Even if you're not in drag, they always find a way to dress you up.
Before they dress you down.
We were invited to participate in a project called Talking Back to the Media in Amsterdam. We were just really taken by the story of Yves Klein. The way in which the media used Yves Klein as the model for their idea of an artist, just as a sort of clown figure. And then the fact that his life ended as a result of it.
Geneva, 1984. The performance is called XXX Blue.
We had 3 giant canvases hanging down onto the floor.
The activity, performance painting. The music, the soundtrack from Mondo Cane. The cut, models in blue from the Yves Klein sequence.
We had 3 stuffed poodles made by taxidermists. 3 big vats of blue paint on the floor.
The color, chroma key blue or international Klein blue.
We climbed up the ladders with the soggy, dripping poodles.
XXX equals poison, XXX as kisses, XXX as signature, XXX as epitaph.
The audience applauded.
The audience, the elite, the collectors, the media.
Are you listening? Are you listening? Do you get the picture? Do you get the picture? Do you know what to say? Do you know what to say when there is nothing to say? When there is nothing to say, shut the fuck up. Shut the fuck up.
'86, I guess it was, when AIDS started to hit. And that was the year we moved to New York. I guess the art scene was particularly hard hit. And '87, we made the first AIDS painting for a fundraiser for AMFAR, the American Foundation for AIDS Research. You know, our AIDS logo was based on the Robert Indiana Love image. What we were doing initially was more like an identity campaign, like an advertising campaign for a disease, to normalize it in a sense. And it's a piece that took off. It became, the same year, a poster campaign in New York, and then San Francisco, and then later Toronto and Berlin and other cities. We did a whole series of paintings, and we did wallpaper, so that the gallery itself became a sort of signage related to the disease. This is a time when the president of the US famously had not uttered the word AIDS publicly. So in a way, this was a kind of advertising campaign. We also produced a sort of advertising campaign for the advertising campaign in our very meta way. Our Image Virus photo series documented the various AIDS projects. This is an AIDS poster project in the New York subway system of 4,500 posters in the subway system. And the interesting thing about the New York subway system is that everybody uses it, and it passes through every part of the city. So it passes through all social, racial, etc. groups. It's the bloodstream of the city.
In Amsterdam, we did placards like this on the trams, and then we did it again the same way in Seattle. Most of the artists who came to be known as AIDS artists in New York disapproved of what we were doing. They considered it immoral to make a poster that didn't include information on having safe sex. The relationship to the healthcare system is so different in Canada. So much of it is based on real concern with healthcare rather than with liability and stuff like that. And, you know, the Americans were angry and confrontational, and we weren't angry and we weren't confrontational. And so they really took offense at that. They felt somehow that we must not really care. You know, our AIDS logo was based on the love image. First of all, they considered that to be sort of ironic and consequently not serious. Canadians and Europeans, I think, interpret as being about universal love. But Americans think it's about sexual freedom. So the interpretation of the AIDS logo initially was, oh, what they mean is if you have sex, you'll get AIDS. You know, now, all that AIDS work by general idea is very much accepted in the US, but initially it was not. We made this AIDS sculpture for a public art exhibition in Hamburg. It was up for 9 months. It was covered in graffiti and posters by the end of the 9 months, and then toured to various museums, but had the tendency to get cleaned off during the middle of the night because museums didn't like the idea of the piece collecting evidence of the dialogue that was going on around it. One of the things that interests me about the concentration camps and the whole thing with HIV is you have a community which is traumatized over a very long period of time. And there's no way to go through the normal processes of grieving and processing. At the same time, the communities are being demolished while the greater population around is staying intact. At that time, nobody really knew for sure how it was spread. Nobody really knew anything. I mean, we were all living in ignorance. We had no idea whatsoever. Everybody knew that they could catch it at any time. That was part of the urgency of it, I guess. I think late '89, Felix was diagnosed. In 1990, I think Jorge was diagnosed. And then all the pill stuff happened because, you know, our lives were full of pills. Interview magazine invited us to make a calendar, one of their artist calendars, and we produced this documentation of what was going on in the daily life. And all these little pills started to look like Donald Judd sculptural units. We began to produce sculptural installations using the pill form. And then at the time when Felix was taking AZT, he was taking 5 pills a day, we made this installation of 5 large pills, a 1-day dose. And on the wall you can see the groups of 5 together making a 1-year dose of AZT, 1 year and 1 day of AZT. And the thing about the big pills, of course, is that they're 7 feet long, so they're just large enough that they suggest the presence of a human body in them. Red, green, and blue pills, in Vienna this was. As the balloons deflated, they would come down and people would carry them home with them. So it's a piece that would deinstall itself and disperse into the homes of the populace. Magic Bullet is the title of the piece on the ceiling here. It's about 2,500 helium-filled balloons in the shape of pills, obviously based on Warhol's silver pillows. You can think of them a bit as the breath of life. On the floor, a piece called Magic Carpet, a bed of fluorescent tubes.
It was artists like General Idea that helped open up the closet doors for a lot of people and allow them to be themselves.
A lot of the artwork at the time that dealt with AIDS dealt with the devastation of the epidemic and dealt with the anger at political figures and religious figures who were blocking people's access to health care. Circulating the AIDS logo, in a sense, normalized it. It becomes a natural part of the landscape.
It was a time where no artist would admit their vulnerability, and they certainly rose above the circumstances they found themselves in.
Our career was really in closer contact with Europe. I think we were easier to import than the Americans, and there were very few Europeans dealing with this subject. Pharmacopoeia was originally made for an exhibition we did in Barcelona. The piece was done in red and yellow because those were the Spanish colors. So it was a critique of the lack of AIDS policy or action on the part of the Spanish government. One of our last self-portraits was as three doctors listening to each other's hearts. I think this is one of the best known pieces by General Idea. It consists of many hundreds of sheets, 4x8 sheets of styrofoam, of white styrofoam, and then way in the background are three little white harp seal pups. Well, we all know about the pitiful little baby white harp seals, but it's obviously the piece which is a kind of self-portrait, and it was politically incorrect in that it was a self-portrait of the artist as a victim. And this is another version that was based on the David Caspar Friedrich painting called, well, colloquially it's called The Wreck of Hope. Seems quite appropriate. In 93, Jorge and Felix were quite ill, and Felix was living here. Jorge and I came back to Toronto from New York, and we began to work on a series of smaller works that we could conceptualize and realize in the space of our own home. We had to plan our estate, and also we had to complete as much work as we could before they died. And then we had to also actually plan their deaths. We moved back to Toronto for the healthcare, and they decided they wanted to die at home, which meant we had to get the right kind of home and be in the right kind of place and have the right assistance and all of that so they could work till the bitter end. It was ironically an extraordinarily satisfying time. We were sort of moving at a incredibly fast rate through all these projects. Everything was cooking, you know, it was just like we were all on and going for it. So I think a lot of our best work was produced during that period.
If anything, it was a weird kind of inspiration, you know. It drew us together as much as anything, too. Jorge was a person who drew nonstop, and basically General Idea, all we did all the time was talk. We sat around a table, drank coffee, and talked, and Jorge would draw. And towards the end, he started to lose his eyesight, and this is one of the last drawings he made in December of '93. And the black floaters in his eyes were beginning to completely fill his field of vision. And so he began to, he found this old paint sample book, and he drew the black floaters as cockroaches, obliterating his view of the household. It's a drawing that Felix made very near the end of his life. It's the end of his world. It's also like a bit of a film credit. You know, the final scene, the end of the Western.
When Jorge and Felix began to get sick, I started to take these sort of healing workshops, all sorts of different techniques and so on, of which the central one, I guess the most normal one, was massage. I wanted to be able to be there for them through their dying process, and I think I was successfully. When Jorge and Felix died, General Idea died with them, and consequently my identity vanished again, my identity as part of General Idea. So I think the next 5, 6, 7 years after that, I really was flailing around trying to find a new identity. Initially, the automatic identity that everybody attached to me was as a sort of victim. This is the person who had lost everything. That's what I was thinking about my losses. But at the same time, I knew that I wasn't going to stop there, you know, that had to be a very temporary sort of thing. It's an inscription off of a sarcophagus. And it's a sarcophagus with a person sculpted on the surface of the sarcophagus, life-size figure. And it's the person is naked with worms crawling out of their eyes. When Felix died, he had gathered more and more color and pattern around him as he got sick. This is how he presented himself for the last week or two of his life. People came to visit him at home, and he died at home. Both of them died at home. And I took this photo maybe 2 or 3 hours after Felix died. He didn't have enough flesh left on the bone to close his eyes. His friends came and sat with the body. We kept him at home for 24 hours. And it's since been exhibited countless times. This was a portrait, 3 portraits, I guess, of Jorge that I took about a week before he died. And his father had been a survivor from Auschwitz, and he had this idea that he looked much as his father had looked when he came out of Auschwitz. He's blind here, and he asked me to take these pictures to document that. So when I finally produced them as a piece, I printed them in sepia on mylar, so they have this sense of memory to them. And it's interesting how vivid that echo back to Auschwitz is. And this piece is in fact in the collection of the Jewish Museum in New York. Then I needed a third portrait. I needed a death portrait of myself, With Felix and Jorge, General Idea had also died, and so that part of me that was General Idea had died, and I made this coffin as the third in that trilogy of death portraits of General Idea. I think life is primarily our relationships. The part we play in the web of people that we know at various levels, you know, whether it is intimately or in a more distant way or in a work way or whatever. I think our position within a web of people is the most important aspect of being alive.
You're not